Okay, I think this is time. This is 5 past 8 p.m. in Beijing. Although we have relatively low number of participants at the moment, I feel compelled that we should begin. So, with your permission, let me start and thank you everyone for joining us for today's virtual seminar on development, um, uh, uh, making development work for communities. This is an open outreach seminar which is organized by the Independent Accountability Mechanisms of African Development Bank, AIIB, IFC MIGA, IKI, UNDP, and the World Bank. I hope I'm not missing anyone here. And of course, the European Investment Bank. We are doing it in collaboration with the Arab Watch Coalition. And before I proceed any further, John, if I may invite you to say a few words. John, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Shams. Can you hear me?
Very well.
Good. My name is John Garrison. I work at the Compliance Advisor and Ombudsman Office of the International Finance Corporation in Washington. Want to wish everyone a good morning, afternoon, and evening. As we begin this webinar, we want to acknowledge the conflict in Gaza and the pain that it is causing. We are in solidarity with those suffering from the violence and are hopeful that peace can be restored. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. And ladies and gentlemen, before we move to the substance of this seminar, allow me to mention a few housekeeping points here. This session is being live streamed, and from here on, when I'm saying these words, we are going to also start recording it. Please mute your mic if you are not speaking. You can use the raise hand function if you wish to ask question. You could just go to this little smiley on the bottom of your screen called reactions, click it, and you will see the raised hand function. Please wait for your turn. When you're asked to take the floor, unmute yourself, ask the question, and mute. Kindly keep your question or intervention brief. If you are listening to the plenary will switch between English and Arabic. And if you want to listen to interpretation in another language, simultaneous interpretations are provided in Arabic and French, along with English as the main language. And if you want to switch to one of the interpretation languages, please go to this little globe at the bottom of your screen called interpretation, click it, and then choose the language in which you want to listen. But at the same time, just mute the original audio, and then you will be able to listen in to the seminar in the language of your preference. We will be doing some interesting polls or quizzes throughout the session. Please participate in those quizzes. Stay tuned till the end. We would really appreciate, because the Q&A sessions at the end of every session will be rather brief. But at the end, we have kept sufficient time for you to ask questions. Recording of this seminar will be available at a later stage. And at the end of the seminar, we will request you to kindly give us a feedback. We have prepared a brief feedback survey for you to participate in. With this, I will move forward and allow me to introduce this rather novel approach of doing outreach, joint outreach as independent accountability mechanisms. This particular seminar is aimed at expanding outreach to civil society and project-affected communities. Our aim is to really increase awareness on how civil society organizations and communities can reach out to independent accountability mechanisms. In the past, whenever we did outreach events with civil society, participants often asked, so when is the next event? And where do we go from here? So we decided to leverage technology and open up our outreach approach through these virtual seminars. We did the first open outreach seminar for Asia region a few months ago, and it was quite a success. This is the second seminar that we are doing. And here we are, we will try to do something new in every seminar or open outreach seminar that we will do going forward. The first one we did as independent accountability mechanisms. In this particular seminar, we are doing it in collaboration with the Arab Watch Coalition. And we hope that we can collaborate with more civil society organizations in the future and do more regional events. At the same time, we will also do more focused events or more thematic events. We will stream these events on social media. We will do them more frequently, and we can also adapt based on the feedback that you provide us after attending these seminars. This brings me to the agenda of today. This seminar is divided into several sections. For those of you who are new to the topic, I will briefly talk about the origins or genesis of independent accountability mechanisms. We will then move on to the next section where Maria Shahnouni will talk about the role of civil society organizations in the accountability ecosystem. We will then introduce all participating independent accountability mechanisms and how to access them. And of course, my colleagues Hatim and Andrea will be doing that. We will then move on to talk about who can file a complaint, how to file a complaint, the usual eligibility requirements. So typical questions on how people can access independent accountability mechanisms, the sort of generic information in terms of eligibility and how to do that. And Helena will lead that section. That session. We will then briefly talk about a very typical process of dispute resolution and discuss a case. And Scott and Alma will take us through that. And subsequently, we will do the same with compliance review process and discuss a case. And our colleagues Serge and Omar will take us through that session. If you aren't speaking, colleagues or participants, please mute yourself. And if we see this disruption, we will remind you. But if this disruption from a particular participant for unknown reasons continues, we will be forced to eliminate the disruptor. In the end, of course, confidentiality and reprisals will be discussed by Serge, and then we will move on to the questions and answers. Let me remind you, we will allow Q&A at the end of every session, but the main Q&A will be at the end. And also, of course, we will be taking or doing some quizzes in between as well. Before I move forward, if I may request John to kindly share the link again, John. I will remind participants that the presentation here has been translated into Arabic and French languages, and these PDFs of these translations are available in the link that John has already shared and will be sharing it shortly again. You could simply download those translations for your own purpose. I will begin with the genesis of independent accountability mechanisms. Some of you may be new to the topic or new to the field and must be wondering what independent accountability mechanisms do, what are their origins, who do they report to, where do they come from? So allow me to take you back in the late 80s and early 90s when this particular dam project in India called Narmada Dam, it became famous because of the environmental and social issues which the project affected people and communities were facing. For this particular project, if you just go and put its name on Google, you will see the magnitude of land submerged, or the number of people who were affected by this. It's a staggering number. The livelihoods lost, the land submerged, the people affected. The magnitude was quite significant. And civil society organizations very passionately voiced these concerns to the global community. And of course, this added to the growing civil society demands for financial institutions to become or demonstrate more responsibility for the negative environmental and social impacts of their projects. This was followed by some of the events, including the UN Conference on Environment and Development in Rio in 1992, where a lot of CSOs came together and provided historic context and policy impetus. In 1992, the World Bank president launched an investigation into the Narmada River. This was called the Morse Commission, who found that the bank was not in compliance with its policies. And in 1992, the famous Webb Hans report came out, which analyzed the poverty of the World Bank's loan portfolio. Now, these may look like different events, but all of these events, in a way or the other, came together and resulted in the emergence of independent accountability mechanisms. So the World Bank Inspection Panel was eventually established by the World Bank Board of Directors in 1993. And this was, of course, an impartial fact-finding body, independent from the staff and management, reporting directly to the board, particularly on environmental and social complaints that it received. The aim was to promote independent accountability and give project-affected people more voice, but more importantly, an opportunity to provide redress for the complaints that they had or concerns that they had on the projects. Independent accountability mechanisms became a norm in 1990s with Inter-American Development Bank, Asian Development Bank, African Development Bank, EIB, EBRD, UNDP, AIIB, and IKI, and many other institutions established independent accountability mechanisms. Today, if a new development, multilateral development bank, or a multilateral financial institution is established, it's almost a given that it will have an independent accountability mechanism. And it has indeed emerged as an integral part of the governance of MDBs and development institutions at large. So much so that all of the independent accountability mechanisms have come together to form what we call Independent Accountability Mechanisms Network. Over 20 multilateral development banks, agencies, or bilateral institutions are part of it. And every year we meet to talk about a variety of topics. And we had our annual meeting just a couple of months ago in London, where we discussed many interesting and exciting topics. So this is about independent accountability mechanisms. And before I move on to the next session, if you have any burning questions, please feel free to come in. And if there are no burning questions, I would like to start the first poll. If you want to ask a question, please raise your hand. And I will invite you to unmute yourself and ask a question. Okay, we don't have a question. In this case, allow me to launch the quiz. And we have 3 questions in the first quiz. Can I check if all of you can see the quiz? Can I have a show of thumbs just to confirm that you can see the quiz? And for those who are listening to the interpretation, let me read the questions for you. The first question is, when was World Bank's inspection panel established? The second question is accountability mechanisms. Primarily, the primary mandate is to fight corruption, independently assess people's environmental and social complaints, or evaluate development projects. And third question is IAMNet is a network of, option one is networking professionals, option two is network of independent accountability mechanisms, and option three is network of procurement functions of multilateral development banks. The response rate is very low. I would request everyone to kindly participate, even if you are well-versed with the independent accountability mechanisms. We only have 2 participants who have participated in this quiz so far. Can I encourage all of you to answer the quiz questions? Can I confirm that you can still see the quiz? Okay, it seems that it says that the poll ended. I think there might be some technical glitch because I haven't ended it, but I would request that if you are a co-host, allow me to run the quizzes. Otherwise, we might have an issue. So, but I think this was a relatively easy quiz. So let me just share the results here, and the results are very clear. The World Bank Inspection Panel was established in 1993. Accountability mechanisms' primary mandate is to independently assess people's environmental and social concerns or complaints. And of course, IAMNet is a network of independent accountability mechanisms. So I'm stopping to share the quiz, and let me move on to the role of independent accountability mechanisms. And with this, I would like to invite Maria to kindly take the floor. Maria, the floor is yours. And when you want to move to the next slide, just say next, and I'll move next. Thank you.
شكرا. مرحبا جميعا، اسمي ماريا السحنوني، أنا مسؤولة التواصل والمناصرة في تحالف Arab Watch. فما هو تحالف Arab Watch؟ تحالف Arab Watch هو تحالف إقليمي يضم 33 ممثلا للمجتمع المدني من 7 بلدان في منطقة الشرق الأوسط وشمال إفريقيا، من ضمنها اليمن، العراق، تونس، المغرب، لبنان، الأردن ومصر. تتمثل مهمة تحالف Arab Watch في مراقبة أنشطة المؤسسات المالية الدولية على مستوى المنطقة لضمان تنمية شاملة وتشاركية عادلة ومستدامة، ويسعى التحالف إلى ضمان توافق سياسات ومشاريع المؤسسات المالية الدولية مع احتياجات وتطلعات المجتمعات المحلية في المنطقة. فنحن نشتغل مع المجتمع المدني والمجتمعات المحلية وأصحاب الحقوق من أجل أن تنعكس مصالحهم في أجندات التنمية الوطنية. Next. كما يعلم الجميع، تلعب المؤسسات المالية الدولية في منطقة الشرق الأوسط وشمال إفريقيا دورا مهما، فإنها تقدم القروض والمشورة بشأن السياسات والمساندة الفنية للحكومات والشركات، وتعمل على تنفيذ مجموعة واسعة من أنشطة التنمية، بما في ذلك التنمية الاقتصادية والتنمية الاجتماعية والتمكين الاقتصادي والبيئية. وإنها كذلك تمارس درجات متفاوتة من التأثير على السياسة الاقتصادية في المنطقة. تخلو المؤسسات الدولية من الانتقادات، ومن ضمن أبرز الانتقادات الموجهة إلى المؤسسات المالية الدولية ودعمها للنمو الاقتصادي السريع دون الاهتمام الكافي بالآثار الاجتماعية والبيئية المترتبة عنه، وكذلك افتقارها إلى الشفافية والمساءلة، وعدم منح المجتمعات المحلية فرصة كافية للمشاركة في عملية صنع القرار المتعلقة بالمشاريع التي تمولها. استجابة لحالات الضرر الناجم عن المشاريع الممولة من المؤسسات المالية الدولية، تعمل آليات المساءلة المستقلة كوسيلة أساسية للأفراد المتضررين لطلب الانتصاف. لكن المشكل أن حجم الشكاوى منخفض جدا في منطقة الشرق الأوسط وشمال إفريقيا، وذلك يعكس تحدي نشر المعلومات الكافية حول هذه الآليات. وهنا يأتي دور منظمات المجتمع المدني، حيث تعمل كوسيط بين المجتمعات وآليات المساءلة المستقلة. فيمكن اعتبارها كجسر يربط بين المجتمعات المحلية وآليات المساءلة المستقلة، فإنها تعمل على نشر الوعي بهذه الآليات وشرح إجراءات تقديم الشكاوى. فمثلا ينظم تحالف أرب ووتش ندوات وحملات توعية لتعريف المجتمعات بدور آليات المساءلة المستقلة، وكذلك يدعم الأفراد المتضررين في تقديم الشكاوى. وتقوم كذلك منظمات المجتمع المدني بمراقبة أداء آليات المساءلة المستقلة وإصدار تقارير حول نقاط الضعف والقوة في هذه الآليات، وتقديم توصيات لتحسين فعاليتها. وكذلك تدعو منظمات المجتمع المدني إلى اتخاذ إجراءات.
I'm sorry for disruption. I don't know when to move next. So Maria, you have to maybe show me thumb to move next because I'm in the interpretation. Just show me your thumb when you want to move next.
Okay, sure. Move next. So we can be synchronized. Yeah. وكذلك تدعو منظمات المجتمع المدني إلى اتخاذ إجراءات وقائية وقائية اجتماعية وبيئية أقوى في تصميم المشاريع وتنفيذها، وتعمل على ضمان أن يكون للمجتمعات المحلية صوت هادف في عمليات صنع القرار التي تؤثر على حياتهم. ننتقل إلى عمل تحالف أرب ووتش مع المجتمعات المحلية المتضررة. لقد عمل تحالف أرب ووتش مع الحملة المناهضة لبناء سد بسري في لبنان، وتم تقديم 3 شكاوى إلى هيئة التفتيش، وهي آلية المساءلة المستقلة للبنك الدولي. لم يتم التحقيق فيها، ومع ذلك نجحت الحملة وقام البنك الدولي بإلغاء بناء السد. ونحن نعمل حاليا مع مجموعة من العائلات اللبنانية التي استملكت أراضيها لبناء السد، لكنها لم تتلقى تعويضا كافيا. قد قدموا كذلك شكوى اعتبرت غير مؤهلة، لكننا لا نزال نستكشف سبلا أخرى لتحقيق العدالة. كذلك دعم تحالف أرب ووتش 3 شكاوى إلى المحقق المستشار لشؤون تقيد بالأنظمة بآلية المساءلة وهي آلية المساءلة المستقلة لمؤسسة التمويل الدولية. 1 ضد مصنع تيتان في الإسكندرية، و2 ضد مصنع تيتان في بني سويف، لأن المصنع تسبب في أضرار جسيمة للبيئة وصحة السكان المحليين وانتهك معايير العمل. قام المحقق المستشار لشؤون تقيد بالأنظمة بالتحقيق في شكاوى، ووجد أن مؤسسة التمويل الدولية فشلت في تقييم الآثار البيئية والاجتماعية للمشروع بشكل كافي قبل الموافقة على التمويل. شكرا، ولا تترددوا في طرح الأسئلة. Shams, I'm over. I raised my thumb, but you didn't see me.
My apologies, Maria, if that was the case. But I think you have covered all the points that you wanted to cover in your presentation, and of course we have all the translations available. I will now invite if there are any questions to Maria. If there are any burning questions that any of the participants would like to ask Maria, please raise your hand, and I will invite you to unmute yourself to ask question. Okay, So it seems there are no questions. Let's move on to the next session, which is Introduction to Participating Independent Accountability Mechanisms. And may I invite Hatim Saduk to start with the first few mechanisms, which are AFDB, AIIB, and EIB, and then we will move on to Andrea for the remaining IAMs. Hatim, the floor is yours, and just raise your thumb and I will change the slides.
That's clear. Thank you, Shams. I'll continue in Arabic. So, مرحبا بالحضور. سنستعرض الآن الآليات المستقلة للمساءلة، أهدافها ومبادئها، وكيف يمكن الوصول إليها، حيث أن هذه الآليات تلعب دورا حيويا في تقييم شكاوى المجتمعات بشأن القضايا البيئية والاجتماعية. بالرغم من اختلاف هياكلها وخصائصها، إلا أن آليات المساءلة تتشارك في مهمة التقييم المستقل للشكاوى المتعلقة بالقضايا البيئية والاجتماعية. هدفها إنصاف عادل وملموس للمجتمعات المتأثرة، وذلك لدعم مهمة المؤسسات المالية الدولية في تعزيز التنمية المستدامة ومكافحة الفقر. إضافة إلى ذلك، تسعى آليات المساءلة إلى تعزيز التعلم المؤسسي داخل المؤسسات المالية الدولية، ويتم كل هذا من خلال تنفيذ برامج المساءلة التي تشمل تسوية النزاعات أو حل المشاكل، مراجعة التقيد بالأنظمة واللوائح والسياسات، أي مراجعة الامتثال لسياسات وقوانين المؤسسات المالية، وأيضا الخدمات الاستشارية وبرامج التوعية والتواصل للتعريف بالآليات وبمهامها. بصفة عامة، يحتاج المتضررون إلى تحديد المشروع الذي يؤثر عليهم سلبا، والممول من المؤسسة المالية الدولية أو البنك، ثم يحاولون تسوية مخاوفهم مع المشروع أو مع إدارة البنك. وفي حال عدم رضا المتضررين عن رد المشروع أو عن رد إدارة البنك، يمكنهم التقدم بشكوى إلى آلية المساءلة، فتقوم الآلية بمراجعة الشكوى وتحديد ما إذا كانت مؤهلة للمرحلة الآتية، وذلك بإجراء تسوية النزاعات أو عملية التقيد بالأنظمة. So, Shams, you can go to the guiding principles slide. ما هي المبادئ التوجيهية التي تحكم عمل هذه الآليات؟ أولاً، يجب على آليات المساءلة أن تكون مستقلة وحيادية، أي يمكنها اتخاذ قراراتها بدون تدخل خارجي. يجب على هذه الآليات أيضاً أن تكون فعالة ونزيهة، أي يتسنى لها تحقيق نتائج فعالة بعيداً عن أي أفعال غير أخلاقية. هي أيضاً متاحة وشفافة، أي أنها مفتوحة للعموم، مما يساعد في بناء الثقة بين الأفراد والآليات. وأخيراً، لابد أن تكون آلية المساءلة مسؤولة ومشاركة، أي أن تتحمل مسؤوليات قراراتها ونتائجها وتتقبل مشاركة المعنيين في عملياتها. Next slide شمس. نتناول الآن الآلية الأولى، وهي الآلية المستقلة للانتصاف التابعة للبنك الإفريقي للتنمية. هذه الآلية تتقبل الشكاوى المتعلقة بجميع المشاريع التي تمولها مجموعة البنك الإفريقي للتنمية، ووظائفها تشمل تسوية النزاعات، أي استعادة الحوار الفعال بين المشتكين والأطراف الأخرى بهدف حل هذه المشاكل، مراجعة التقيد بالأنظمة والسياسات للتحقق فيما إذا كان البنك قد امتثل لسياساته وإجراءاته وقوانينه. وأيضاً من وظائفها الخدمة الاستشارية، أي تعزيز التعلم المؤسسي وثقافة الامتثال داخل البنك الإفريقي للتنمية. أدعوكم لزيارة موقع الويب irm.afdb.org لمزيد من التفاصيل والمعلومات حول الآلية المستقلة للانتصاف. آليتنا التالية هي آلية الأشخاص المتأثرين بالمشاريع التابعة للبنك الآسيوي للاستثمار في البنية التحتية. تتقبل هذه الآلية الشكاوي المتعلقة بمشاريع القطاعين العام والخاص التي يمولها البنك الآسيوي، وتقدم استفسارات عن الأسئلة حول معالجة المشاريع، وتقوم أيضاً بحل النزاعات والمشاكل ومراجعة التقيد بالسياسات والأنظمة الامتثال. يمكنكم العثور أيضاً على مزيد من المعلومات على الموقع الإلكتروني للآلية AIIB PPM. ننتقل إلى الآلية الثالثة، وهي آلية الأشخاص المتأثرين بالمشاريع التابعة لمجموعة البنك آلية الشكاوي التابعة لمجموعة البنك الأوروبي للاستثمار. تتقبل الشكاوي المتعلقة بالمشاريع الممولة من قبل البنك الأوروبي للاستثمار، ووظائفها هي الآتية: أولا التقيد بالسياسات والأنظمة أو مراجعة الامتثال لسياسات وقوانين البنك. ثانيا حل النزاعات، تسوية المشاكل. ثالثا الخدمات الاستشارية والتعلم المؤسسي. وأخيرا المراقبة أو الرصد لمتابعة الشكاوي المغلقة والتأكد من تنفيذ التدابير المتفق عليها من جميع الأطراف. لا تنسوا زيارة موقع آلية الشكاوى EIB Complaints Mechanism لمزيد من المعلومات المفصلة. شكرا على الانتباه.
Yeah, is the next slide on?
Thank
Sorry,
you.
probably takes.
And
Sorry.
can we thank you very much, Fatin. I think it's time to move on to let's just continue with the introduction of the mechanisms. If there are any burning questions, by the way, we can certainly entertain those questions now. Otherwise, we can move on to the next independent accountability mechanisms. And at the end of the introduction of all IAMs, we can take questions. So maybe, Andrea, if I may invite you to introduce the remaining independent accountability mechanisms. Andrea, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Shams. The Compliance Advisor Ombudsman is the independent accountability mechanism of the so-called private sector arm of the World Bank Group, that is the International Finance Corporation and the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency. And it has three main functions. One is the dispute resolution function, where it brings parties together and promotes a mutually accepted outcome of a dispute. It also has a so-called compliance function, where it assesses the actions of the IFC and MIGA against its own environmental and social standards, the so-called performance standards. And it has a very well-established advisory functions, through which it not only advises its own institution internally on improvements, but also often publishes its learnings and findings in reports and briefs. And it's really worth looking at their website. Thank you. Next slide, please. And it takes some time here where I am. Yes. I am working at the complaints office of the ICI Independent Complaint Mechanism. That is, ICI is a bilateral climate and biodiversity funding instrument of the German government. And the ICI ICM accepts complaints on all projects that are being financed or co-financed by ICI. We have, as all mechanisms here, a compliance review function with regard to environmental and social safeguards, but we also look at integrity, that is, fraud and corruption issues. And we also have an alternative dispute resolution function and an advisory function. Our specialties are that we do also accept anonymous complaints. And if you want to notify us of a serious environmental harm happening in the context of one of ICI's projects, then we do not require you to prove that you also have been individually harmed. Next slide, please. It takes some time. Yeah, here. Yeah, SECBO is the Social and Environmental Compliance Unit. That is the independent accountability mechanism of the United Nations Development Program. And it investigates allegations of UNDP's non-compliance with its own social and environmental standards, as well as other relevant policies. So it is the compliance review function. And it's important to note that UNDP has also an independent dispute resolution mechanism called the Stakeholder Response Mechanism, SRM, which, as other dispute resolution function, helps project-affected stakeholders, governments, and other parties to jointly resolve the concerns and disputes. And both units have their own websites where you can find further information. Next slide, please. Not coming up here. Now, slowly. So last but not least, there's the World Bank Accountability Mechanism. which is the mechanism of the public sector arm of the World Bank Group, the IBRD and IDA, the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development and the International Development Association. So it houses both the inspection panel as well as the dispute resolution service. The inspection panel is responsible for receiving the complaints and ultimately also conducting compliance investigations, while the dispute resolution service is responsible for conducting dispute resolution processes if the parties wish to do so. And it has also a website where you can find information on both mechanisms. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea. And this is an opportunity for participants to ask questions about independent accountability mechanisms who are participating in this seminar. Our colleagues Hatem and Andrea have shared the information about 7 independent accountability mechanisms. Of course, we will be talking about them, their eligibility criteria, their, who can file a complaint to them, their policies in the next session. But if you have any questions about any of the independent accountability mechanisms, you have the opportunity to raise hand and ask your question now. Okay, we should move on to the next section, which is how to file a complaint. And I'm inviting my colleague Helena Toledo from UNDP Secure to kindly take the floor. Helena, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Shams. Hello, everyone. As mentioned before, my name is Helena Toledo, and I'm part of the Social and Environmental Compliance Unit, also called SECU, at the United Nations Development Program. And now we will talk about who can file a complaint, how you can file it, and what the criteria are for the complaint to be eligible for a compliance review or a dispute resolution process. So if we move to the next slide. Here we outline who can file a complaint. This table describes the different mechanisms represented in this meeting. In the columns and across the rows, there are the different entities that can file a complaint. So first and foremost, individuals or communities who have been affected by projects funded by these development institutions are the ones who can initiate a complaint. And these individuals or communities can be represented or work with local, national, or international civil society organizations in the process of filing a complaint. These CSOs will be filing the complaint on behalf of the project affected people. The individuals or the communities must be the primary complainants. And in the case of AIIB and the World Bank mechanism, representation by international CSOs is possible when no local representation is available. In a number of these mechanisms, the board of directors can initiate a complaint if they identified a significant social or environmental concerns in one of their projects. In other cases, for example, at SECU, where there is not a board of directors per se, the lead compliance officer or the head of UNDP have the capacity to start a complaint if they believe a project has significant social or environmental concerns. If we can move to the next slide, please. Here, there are some of the key elements for submitting a complaint to the mechanisms. And here's important to keep in mind that the mechanisms are looking to make this process as simple and accessible as possible. So one of the first things to note in this slide is that the complainants can submit the concerns in any language, and the mechanism will be responsible of translating the complaint into the working language of the institution. The complaints can be submitted in the format that is most convenient to communities. So this could be traditional mail, email, video submissions in some cases. In some other instances, submissions do need to be in writing. but this will vary across mechanisms. And when filing a complaint, it's important. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, well, when filing a complaint, you see the third row there, it's important to describe the harm suffered and if possible, pinpoint the specific institution and project suspected to be associated with the harm. And this is just to ensure that the mechanisms are addressing the complaints related to projects funded by their parent institutions and aligning with their mandate. In most cases, the mechanisms may help you confirm if the project is financed by their parent institution or not, but it's always good to include all the information that you have available in your complaint. And finally, if complainants feel that they are putting themselves at any risks because of filing this complaint, they have the right to request confidentiality of their names. And what this means is that the mechanism will safeguard the complainant's identity and will not share it with anyone within or outside institution. Only the staff within the mechanism will have access to this information. So if we can move on to the next slide. Yeah. So now, finally, these are the requirements for a complaint to be eligible for a compliance review or a dispute resolution process. So once a complaint is filed, the mechanism must determine if the complaint meets the criteria for investigation or a dispute resolution process. And the criteria are these 6 points. First, project funding. This involves verifying that the project in question is funded by the specific development or finance institution that hosts the mechanism. Second, it's linked to harms. The harm that the complainants are concerned about must be linked in some way to that specific project. At this very early eligibility determination phase, it merely requires to show that there's a reasonable link between these two. Third, project status. This will vary across mechanisms. In some instances, the project needs to be active or have been active in the last few years, but this will vary across mechanisms. Fourth, the complaint cannot be related to corruption issues. These issues generally fall outside the scope of our accountability mechanisms, and most institutions have a separate office specific to deal with those concerns. And fifth, in some instances, the complainants must have contacted the parent institution first, such as in the case of the African Development Bank, AIIB, and the World Bank mechanisms. But other mechanisms allow direct contact with them without prior engagement with the parent institutions. This will also vary across mechanisms. And finally, a complaint cannot be the same as a previously submitted one. In some cases, if new facts or concerns arise after the investigation is completed and there's a resolution, this may be eligible for a new investigation or dispute resolution process. And this is it. This concludes this brief overview of how to file a complaint. Let us know if you have any questions, and if not, over to you, Shams.
Thank you very much, Helena. And I would invite participants to raise hands if you have any questions, or if you want to make a comment, please feel free. You could also write your questions in the chat function. If you want to address your question to a particular speaker, feel free to do that. If you want to ask a general question, you don't have to wait for end of this seminar. We will definitely have a Q&A at the end of the seminar as well, but feel free to ask any question anytime. This is time to go with the next poll. I will request all the co-hosts to watch out and respond to the quiz, but not press any other buttons, because I think something happened the previous time. I'm trying to Do you see the quiz? I think it was the wrong quiz. Okay, I'm launching the poll now. Do you see the quiz in front of you? I think it should be there. Can I have a quick show of thumbs to see if you can actually see the poll in your screens? Fantastic, thank you. And I would invite you to answer the questions. I think co-hosts, I'm not sure if co-hosts can actually answer the questions, but if you can, please feel free to do that. I think co-hosts have a special status, but if other participants can answer the questions, I would invite everyone, all participants, to kindly do that. We have 10 responses. We can potentially have 25 responses. If you're taking time, please feel free. 11 responses, that's good. We have 44% participation rate. Let me read the questions for you. The first question is most IAMs have the following functions: dispute resolution, financial audit, compliance review, advisory work, arbitration, outreach, and communications. The second question is IAMs typically accept complaints from project affected people or their local or international representatives of people communities. The third question is most IAMs accept complaints in any language, format, or medium of communication, only local languages, written through email, English, written through email only. So we have 12 participants so far, and in the interest of time, I'm going to end the poll and share the results. Can I just quickly check if you can see the results on your screens? You should be able to see the results on your screens. So for question 1, it's typically dispute resolution, compliance review, advisory work, outreach, and communication. These are the correct answers. All participants have answered the second question correctly, and the third question is basically any language, format, or medium of communication in most cases. Thank you very much, and I will move on with the next session. And here I'm going to invite my colleagues Scott Adams and Alma to take us through a typical dispute resolution process and a case study. So starting with Scott, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you so much, Shams. And again, my name is Scott Adams. I'm with the World Bank Accountability Mechanism Dispute Resolution Service. So for those of you who can see, the graphic here on the screen is based on on our dispute resolution process, but really most of the mechanisms, dispute resolution, or some go by problem solving, but this process will largely follow these steps with perhaps some minor nuances or changes. But let me just very briefly go through this at a very high level so that our colleague Alma can share a specific case example. But you'll see the first point here is that since the dispute resolution process is voluntary, the first step is for both sides to agree to participate. So that is the people who filed the complaint, the affected communities, and the private sector or public sector client on the other side. If they agree and decide to proceed, then the next step would typically be for the parties to agree on some of the ground rules and procedural matters before they get to the actual substantive disputes in the case. So for example, they would talk about who's going to participate in the process, who are the representatives for each side? What is the scope of the dispute resolution? What will be kept confidential and what information might be publicly disclosed? There might be some behavioral expectations in terms of how they will treat each other, and so on. So these are the kinds of things that would be captured up front. It's often called a framework agreement or a ground rules document or some such. Once that is completed, then the next step is when they really get into the issues in the substantive issues in the complaint. And this is where the mechanisms, either staff and or mediators, will help the parties to understand each other's needs and concerns and try to develop options for resolution that would be acceptable to both sides. If that process goes well and the parties are able to reach an agreement, then that would be the next step. And the mechanism would typically assist the parties in drafting that agreement. This is usually something that's documented in writing. If the mechanism also has a monitoring function, many mechanisms do, then the team can be available to assist the parties with monitoring and implementation of any agreement. And then ultimately, if all of the issues are resolved satisfactorily, the case is closed. And again, it ranges across mechanisms, but there will almost always be some kind of at least minimal public disclosure at the end of the process. So again, very high level, very brief, but just to give you a flavor of what it looks like in general. And I'll pass on to my colleague Alma to speak to a specific case. Thank you. Oh, sorry, if I might. Something I forgot to mention that's very important that was at the bottom of that slide. Most of the mechanisms will offer parties capacity building or training. So these are skills and knowledge that will help them be more effective in the dispute resolution. So things like negotiation skills, communication skills, conflict resolution, and the like. This is something that's offered and we find often helps parties be more successful in the process. Apologies, I forgot to mention that. Thank you. Sorry, Alma, please go ahead.
شكرا سكوت. تحياتي للجميع. أنا ألمع عبد الهادي جد الله من مكتب المحقق لشؤون التقيد بالأنظمة مؤسسة التمويل الدولية. فخورة جدا بجذور عربية من المملكة الأردنية الهاشمية ومن فلسطين. الحقيقة اخترنا لحضراتكم قضية للمشاركة لتوضيح الآليات التي شرحها لكم زميلي سكوت. فاخترنا لحضراتكم شكوى قدمت إلينا لمكتب المحقق في إبريل 2021 تلقيناها ومتعلقة كانت من شخص واحد متعلقة بشركة اليمن لتكرير السكر مجموعة هايل سعيد أنعم الممولة من مؤسسة التمويل الدولية في الحديدة اليمن. وجد المكتب المحقق الحقيقة بعد إجراء التحقيق وتقييم أن الشكوى تنتقل إلى مكتب التسوية أو عملية تسوية النزاعات التي سيرناها وتحويلها إلى وظيفة حل النزاعات بالمكتب في شهر نوفمبر 2021. كما ترون على الشاشة المشاكل المطروحة كانت متعددة. فكان موضوع التلوث، الأثر على سبل عيش المجتمع، الضرر على السمعة المهنية للمشتكي، والشعور بالتهديد والخوف كعواقب لتقديم الشكوى. واجهنا الحقيقة تحديات عديدة كما ترون، جائحة كورونا والنزاع القائم في اليمن، فلم نستطيع الوصول إلى المشتكي بشكل خاص. وبنفس الوقت كان في حدود الوساطة الإلكترونية، الحدود التي لا تسمح لنا باللقاء بشكل مباشر، وخصوصا أن القضايا كانت عديدة. وكان في الحقيقة مشكلة أنه الأطراف وصلت إلى طريق مسدود في التفاوض، وغياب الثقة نتيجة عدم تاريخ من العلاقات بين المشتكي والشركة، والطبيعة التقنية للمشاكل في النزاع. نتيجة لحل هاي المشاكل كلها قررنا الذهاب إلى المملكة الأردنية الهاشمية للمحاولة لحل كل هذه القضايا. والحقيقة نجحنا في توقيع الاتفاقية سرية، ولكن أعرب الطرفان عن ارتياحهما لتنفيذ بعض الجوانب من هذه الاتفاقية بعد استمرار من المراقبة ل4 شهور. وخصوصا كان مهم جدا أنه كان في نتيجة مهمة لهذا الاتفاق، هو كانت متعلقة بإنشاء منتجات محطة معالجة لجميع منتجات مياه الصرف الصناعي السائلة ومنتجات الصرف الصحي في الشركة اليمنية لتكرير السكر. وهذه كانت كلها وفقا لمتطلبات قانون البيئة اليمني ومتطلبات مؤسسة التمويل الدولية. وهذه كلها ستطبق في سنة 2025 وموعد نهائي في 2026. فهذه كانت نتيجة إيجابية لهذه القضية اللي شاركناكم فيها. شكرا. ننتقل الآن إلى الزملاء والزميلات.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Alma. And we can invite questions here for both Scott and Alma. If there are any questions, you have several options to ask questions. You can raise hand and ask questions. You can write your question in the chat function. You can ask question in any language. That is the language of this seminar. So you can ask question in English, you can ask question in Arabic or French. So please feel free to come in. This seminar is for you to seek clarifications, ask questions, engage with the independent accountability mechanisms. And there is no right or wrong question. One of my teachers used to say that there are no, pardon my language, there are no stupid questions, there are only stupid answers. So if you have any question, please come in. All questions are good questions, and we are happy to provide answers. Okay, it seems we are saving all the thunder for the last, and let's move on in that case. We will have to, we are moving to our next session, which is our colleague Serge will talk about a typical compliance review process, and Omar will present a case study. Serge, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Shamas. السلام على الجميع. هتكلم بالإنجليزي باللغة الإنجليزية كونه أهون لي أتكلم باللغة الإنجليزية. So I'll make this presentation about this single slide, which describes how a typical compliance process is conducted. So it's typically divided into 4 steps. One is the receipt of a complaint, whether this receipt is being transferred from a prior process of dispute resolution, or it is submitted to the compliance mechanism directly. The staff would have to determine whether it meets some of the basic admissibility criteria to be acceptable, one of which would be, for example, whether the complaint concerns a project that is financed by the institution, which the mechanism holds accountable, whether this project is still active in one way or another, whether in some cases there has been attempts to resolve the issue before submitting a complaint. If this complaint is deemed admissible, therefore it moves to the next step. There's usually a formal recognition, a formal notice, a public notice that says a complaint has been received. It describes the harms that are raised in the complaint. It is, and it mentions the project and most probably the policies that could be in violation, and that would be part of the investigation if the case would go to an investigation. The next step would be an eligibility process, whereas the compliance staff or the panel members or the head of the unit would have to determine whether an investigation is merited. And here at this stage, the mechanism is looking more substantively into the complaint. It is trying to establish whether the plausibility of link between the claims raised and the project link of harm actually is probable. It tries to establish whether the complainants are eligible, they exist. So it would the mechanism would make a field visit, would meet with the complainants, would meet with all the various project stakeholders, including government or private sector. It meets with the staff of the bank to try to understand holistically what the project is and its purpose, and how it could have or may have impacted or may impact the communities that are filing the complaint. It would ultimately have to determine whether an investigation is merited, and would in some cases submit this recommendation for an investigation for board approval. In other cases, it is done directly, unilaterally, and the mechanism would take that decision and conduct the investigation shortly thereafter. The eligibility process often includes a response from the management, from the institution to the complaint that would describe how the project either addressed the complaints if they are recognized by the institution, or it could also include a denial from the institution, but it has to be a response. It has to be responded to. The complaint has to be responded to by the institution. The response is not binding to the mechanism. It is an input. The mechanism makes its recommendation or its decision whether an investigation is merited independently of the management response. Then the third stage is the investigation. At that stage, the mechanism would start by producing typically an investigation plan or a methodology. It would design it. Sometimes it's internal, sometimes it's an external document that is made public along with the rest of the mechanism, rest of the compliance reviews documentation. Everything is made public in a compliance process. The investigation plan would determine what types of expertise are required, would devise a basic timeline for the investigation process. And then the investigation is conducted. After having selected the experts, a field visit is conducted. The experts would produce reports to the mechanism. The mechanism would take all these reports after having met with the community again and having done a factual review on the ground of the impact that are raised in the complaint, but also in the documentation, everything, how management has been or was made aware of these issues as the project was being designed or implemented, how it has addressed them, whether it was aware of these issues, how it suggested to the government or the client measures to correct course. And all this information would be put in the investigation report, including how the institution has supervised the implementation of the project from approval all the way to receipt of a complaint, and even afterwards once the complaint has been made. Ultimately, the mechanism and the compliance review would have to determine whether the institution is in compliance with its own policies. This investigation does not cover borrower. It revolves always around actions that have been actions or omissions in the context of the project, but most often these actions are not the institution's actions. The institutions don't implement the project. They provide the financing, but the findings are, the finding of compliance or non-compliance are about the institution, whether it has ensured that the borrower or the client are following their policies, and whether it has provided sufficient support during supervision to ensure that course correction are being taken and corrective measures are being implemented. Once the investigation report is finalized, it is submitted to the board or to any governance entity. It could be just an auditor, a higher person, or it could be like as in the World Bank and IFC and other IFIs. It would be the board of directors. And then in response to this investigation report, management would have to produce a response. And this response would entail actions and actions about how the harm would be addressed and how the project would be put back on track for it to be compliant with bank policies or with the IFI's policies. Often the management would require a period of time to implement these actions, and that would be stated in the action plan, and it would also include a requirement for regular reporting back to the institution. The mechanism on its own may, in many cases, also conduct monitoring of the implementation of the action plan and monitoring of whether the findings of the mechanisms have been addressed. So the monitoring requirements vary from one mechanism to another, but overall they are about how the harm has been addressed and the project put back into compliance. The mechanism would report to the board also, or to its governance entity, to its higher governing entity at the institution, would report back how this management action plan is being implemented. And usually the monitoring period would last a few years. It's not an open-ended thing exercise. If ultimately the institution is not being responsive, the monitoring would still end. There are situations where clients or borrowers have entered or exited a project without having provided corrective measures. Shams, I leave it back to you. Thank you. And of course, we'll be ready to answer any questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Serge. I think it's probably good that we move on with the case on compliance review, and allow me to invite Omar Al-Sabi to present the case. And after this, we can, of course, invite the Q&A. Omar, the floor is yours.
Thank you شمس. اسمي عمر السبع. أنا من بنك الاستثمار الأوروبي، آلية الشكاوي لبنك الاستثمار الأوروبي. سوف أتكلم بالإنجليزية نظرا لصعوبة المفردات في هذا المجال. Thank you. So to implement the points explained by my colleague Serge, which are the main steps of the compliance review, I will present a case, which is a complaint that was received at the European Investment Bank complaints mechanism. It concerns an EIB finance project, which is a metro line, and concerns the social impacts of the project. The project is, as I mentioned, is a metro line in a very densely populated area. The group of complainants is market traders, so a group of market traders. It's a station of the metro that is going to be built on in the place of the market. So in terms of eligibility of the complaint was declared admissible, eligible. The project is financed by the EIB. The impacts are linked to the project financed by the EIB, so all this makes it admissible. To start in general on the steps of the handling of the complaint, we started with an initial assessment. The initial assessment is to decide whether we go through dispute resolution, mediation, or a compliance review. And that's a first step in our mechanism that we do for every complaint. In this case, we thought that dispute resolution could be a good tool to use to solve the problem and to address the complaint. Before moving to that, I didn't mention the main allegations of the complaint. So we had, as a main allegation, was the alleged inadequacy of the compensation. So the market traders were asked to vacate the place, but no compensation was discussed with the project affected persons. And later on, there was another allegation of lack of compensation completely, which moved later to inadequate compensation. There was also an allegation of forced eviction and also lack of stakeholder engagement and consultation with the project affected persons. As this is linked a lot to the compensation, so we thought, as I mentioned, that dispute resolution could be a solution. We started with a site visit. We met with all parties and stakeholders, that includes the project promoter, the complainants, also to understand better their concerns. And we started with dispute resolution. The dispute resolution appeared to be not successful because the promoter did not bring lots of solutions that can address the concerns of the complainants, and the meetings were not very fruitful. So we decided to move to compliance directly, and we also made another site visit to inspect the location, to meet with the complainants, to understand better their concerns, and also we met with the promoter to understand also their obstacles and the problems in relation to the project. This stage was concluded with a conclusions report. We found several irregularities, so that means non-compliances with the EIB standards in terms of compensation, stakeholder engagement, which are the package of the EIB social and environmental standards and conditions. As a result of our compliance review, we issued a number of recommendations, which included an action plan. That action plan included finding a suitable compensation to the complainants, to discuss this proposed compensation with the complainants, and to consult on it. In general, the complainants wanted another market. So as I mentioned, their shops, the market was all demolished, and this is the picture of the market after demolition. So they wanted to find a better market. So there was a long discussion on finding the suitable place, suitable market, which is also actively in order for the complainants to restore their activity. So it took a number of years. As part of our function, or mechanism, we have the function or the possibility to monitor our recommendations. So we made sure that we monitored the implementation of the corrective actions that we issued. It took some time due to the complexities in the country, the lack of land also to have another market. But finally, another market, another compensation also was proposed to the complainants. So with this, we concluded our process of handling of this complaint. To the extent possible, we found solutions to the complainants. So we could move, unless you have any questions on the case study, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Umar. I think it's about time that we take questions about the dispute resolution or compliance review, or any other questions that colleagues want to ask at this stage. I would encourage you to ask questions in chat. You can ask question in any of the language of the seminar, which are English, Arabic, and French. If you would like to write your question in the chat, feel free to do that. And if there are no questions, okay, John, you have a question. John, please, the floor is yours.
Oh yes, yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'd like to ask Maria a question because she talked about the fact that there were such few, relatively few complaints coming from the MENA region, and now we've heard about 2 cases on compliance and dispute resolution. So I just want to ask Maria why she thinks. I mean, she mentioned that the IMs, the mechanisms, are not well known in the region, but I was just wondering if there are other reasons for why she thinks there's been a low level of complaints sent by communities in the Middle East region? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, John. I mean, as you said, it's less accessible in this region. I don't think a lot of people know about the existence of independence accountability mechanisms, hence the importance of such outreach seminars, mainly because of language problems. I think that's an important thing because usually everything is published in English, or you'd have to file the complaints in English or French, and people speak Arabic, so there is a language problem, and they're less accessible here. I don't think independent accountability mechanisms are headquartered in the MENA region. Maybe some can correct me if I'm wrong. So there's the accessibility problem and the language problem, and also fear, because I think a lot of communities would be afraid if the project is financed by their government or a big company, so they wouldn't feel secure enough to file complaints because they don't have enough information. So I think these are one of the reasons. There's also reports that I can put in the chat for people that are interested to know more about this.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Maria. My question to Serge, we know that many mechanisms do not allow flexible sequencing of dispute resolution and compliance review. In some mechanisms, this has been experimented, but if people have gone through compliance review, they cannot come back to dispute resolution. Do you have any view on that, or if there are any cases or mechanisms who have experimented with flexible sequencing? Could you kindly share any of your experiences there?
Yeah, thank you, Shams. Yes, it is in most cases predetermined which function would handle the complaint first, and in other cases it is not. In the history of the panel, we've had one case. It says a joint complaint that we received on a project in Kenya. We received it at the inspection panel, but also it was also received at the complaints mechanisms of the European Investment Bank. We conducted a joint investigation, and as a result of the investigation, since EIB has a dispute resolution function, management, and in accord with the community, proposed at the bank management proposed to join as observers the EIB conducted dispute resolution process, and whatever agreement that would result out of that dispute resolution process would be part of the management action plan at the World Bank. So it was a very good, actually, out of the box case. It didn't fit the process of the World Bank, but it worked well. I think it worked well for the community. They received land titles. They had one of their problems was having communal land title. This was an indigenous Maasai community. They wanted a communal land title for the resettlement site they were moved to, so they would have land security. They received that. They needed land security also for a smaller site that was a few kilometers away, where they would establish a museum and a market for artisanal products that the women of the community would produce and sell for the tourists, the European or American tourists that would be visiting the site. So it turned out to be a good example. At the World Bank, the process typically is the panel receives a complaint, conducts an eligibility. If it determines an investigation and this investigation is approved, at that stage, the community and the borrower, the parties, have an option to agree and voluntarily engage in a dispute resolution process. If not, at that moment, then the compliance review and the investigation would take place, or if the dispute resolution fails. So it is predetermined now, and it's rigid. It's not flexible. I'm more in favor to have mechanisms with flexibility so that communities are in control of the process more so than the institution, and that also borrowers have a say. At the end, the problem is between the two sides, and they have a say to resolve it. There is also the mistakes that the institution may have incurred during the design and implementation of the project, and that merits compliance review and compliance investigation, and it is it should be considered as a separate process.
Thank you very much, Serge. And while you are on the mic, if I may ask also a follow-up question, how often during compliance review investigation do IAMs come across other issues of non-compliance that haven't been raised by the complainants? And if that does happen, how can that be addressed? What is a typical process within the IAMs? You were raised a particular issue, let's say related to land resettlement, but you go there and you find many other issues or some other issues. Yeah. How do you deal with that?
So I will speak for the inspection panel. Other mechanisms may have their own way of dealing it. This can happen, and I don't know whether it happens in half the cases or more. So I can't give you exact numbers, but it does happen. And whenever we come aware of new issues, they have to follow a due process. So these are usually complaints are in a way they're complaints of harm people have suffered, but within them they're some sort of an accusation statement. Someone has failed, and that merits a response. So due process would require that these issues that the management of the institution be informed, and at that moment the mechanism would inform the institution. We have made aware of new issues. Please provide us a response. They would provide a response. Now, mind you, in compliance processes are they're not necessarily lengthy. They can be lengthy, but they are protracted, and there's a lot of, in the sense that there's a lot of engagement with the institution during an investigation process, and institutions would put in place measures to address some sort of low-hanging fruits, problems that are easily addressed during the course of the investigation. So a lot can happen in an investigation process, including those minor issues, because they're often minor issues. They're not major issues. Otherwise, they would have appeared from the start. They're minor issues, and they get addressed. If not, they would, of course, be part of the investigation, and they would be covered in the analysis. And then if there's any determination of compliance or non-compliance, then it would have to be made.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Serge. While we have the benefit of Scott still here for next maybe couple of minutes, Scott, may I ask you the question about dispute resolution? And often in dispute resolution, we have seen that there is only partial agreement between the parties. And then, of course, mechanism is only playing a facilitation role. In that case, do you typically issue the dispute resolution agreement? Or what is your approach when there is only partial agreement? How do you sort of move forward, or how do you sort of mediate between the parties?
Thank you, Shams. Yes, so speaking for the World Bank's Dispute Resolution Service, we do have that possibility in our operating procedures. And, sort of at the simplest answer is that if, let's say there's 10 issues in a complaint, parties are able to agree on 8, but 2 are still outstanding, then those 2 issues, if the complainants wish, could refer back to the, or would actually, in our case, they would automatically refer back to the inspection panel for a compliance review. Alma can speak to CO, but I think they have a very similar approach in their policy. And that's it. And that's definitely something that happens in some cases. Again, we're still a relatively young mechanism, just at the dispute resolution side here, just being 2 years. So in our the 2 cases we've had in DR so far that have settled, they've been full and final agreements. But that is hypothetically possible in our process. And I know CAO has experience with those kinds of partial agreements as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Scott. I see a hand from Alison. Alison, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thanks very much. This might be a question directed at Scott, but possibly others will have a view. I was just thinking of the capacity building and training aspect that Scott mentioned in his presentation, and was interested to learn how much support complainants receive once a case is closed in terms of understanding the sustainability of agreements in the longer term.
Sure. Let me share from my own experience, and Alma may wish to add. But it really depends on the case. And you will see that some cases come to us where local communities have NGOs or even lawyers assisting them. And so they are getting a lot of legal or technical or other kinds of advice that from people that they trust, and that's very helpful. Of course, there's also the possibility that complainants can come to us on their own. And so, even before you're reaching an agreement, our staff and the professional neutral mediators that we hire, it's part of our professional responsibilities to try as much as we can to foster informed decision-making. So we have to remain neutral, and we can't be giving, legal or substantive advice ourselves. But if we have a concern that a party, either side, frankly, it can happen on the other side too. But in this case, in terms of communities, if we think they may be signing on to something that they don't have a full understanding of, we can ask questions. We can encourage them to perhaps seek out legal or technical advice. We can't provide it ourselves, but it is something that we could encourage. I know in one case in particular in the past, full disclosure, I used to work at CAO, and in my CAO experience, we referred a group of complainants to some pro bono legal services in their country. We didn't recommend or endorse them. We just said, here's a list of services you may want to consult. So that's another way. And then once the agreement is reached, on the other end, if there are issues in implementation, then again, the staff and the mediators are there to help facilitate any kind of troubleshooting. Because by the time they've reached an agreement, remember, it's a voluntary process. We have very good success with compliance rates. Typically, if there's an issue with implementation, most often it's not because of bad faith, but because of some unforeseen circumstances that neither party foresaw. Maybe a natural disaster, maybe a technical issue that no one foresaw, or what have you. But still, it's helpful to still have those neutral professionals to help the parties work through those issues. So I don't know, I hope that helps. And of course, if the World Bank or the host institution is there as an observer, there are times that they can also lend their expertise and support. But Alma, I don't know if you have anything to add from a CAO perspective on that.
Thank you, Scott, for covering both mechanisms since you had a history with CAO. I think your point is well taken, and the question, thank you very much for that. It's so important to make sure that there is no rush for the parties to address issues that lack clarity or they don't have enough information. And the skill of the mediation team, most of the time they are local mediators, or actually we aim for local mediators who really understand the context very well, try to highlight any discrepancy in understanding, any competing worldviews that people have. And to Scott's point, we try to give equal access to the information and ensure there is equal access to the information. From the CAO perspective, in some of the cases we're working on now, we're struggling with the word building capacity because we want to be respectful that people know their context, have probably mediated for centuries many issues. But what we try to do is within the instruments that we have and within the processes that we have, that they're really understanding fully the terminology, what we mean, any new science around how they can negotiate, what does an impasse mean, what does to take a position and not understand the underlying interest, also the cultural nuances. So we bring all the capacities that we can within our budget to facilitate this type of information. I hope I answered your question, and then I'd like to address the issue of how parties may reach full agreement on all the issues or partial or interim agreement when I have a chance. Shams, I turn it back to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alma. I think you can, why don't you say a few words on this partial or full agreement, and then we will move on to the next session.
Thank you. Thank you. So very quickly, not much to add to what Scott said, but it's very important to remember that some of the cases include one person, as the one I presented on Yemen. And in many other cases, you have really hundreds of people. And so you're always thinking about representation and how the ideas are organized and the grievances are organized. So when you're talking about issues, there are some that can be quickly resolved. There are some that are more structurally rooted in some issues that are maybe even beyond the case or with some external factors. So there are ways to reach this type of agreement where people have an interim agreement. They picked out of 10 issues. We have a case right now, they agreed on 7 out of 10. And as you can imagine, the remaining ones are the more complex. They require more bilaterals, more deliberation, more talking to understanding the full ramifications, who's impacted, ensuring that the representation, and if there is a solution, it will affect the right people, etc. And then there is also the idea of monitoring, which was covered by Scott and also covered by other mechanisms, which is quite important. But at the core ideas in the model of the mediation that we use is that we really want the parties to fully understand what their options. So when they are in direct communication, they have more control over the outcome. When they don't reach an agreement, they have less control over the outcome. And that's a very important educational process for all the parties when they're coming to the negotiation. Thank you. Over to you, Shams. And thank you, Scott.
Excellent. Thank you, Alma. And I think with this, let's move on to the next session. And this is something that Maria has alluded to earlier as well, the issue of reprisals. And you know how in some countries or certain contexts we have the issue of people not being able to speak up when they have a problem on projects, even though independent accountability mechanisms are available, project level GRMs are available, but the issue of reprisals remains a big concern. So if I may invite Serge to shed a bit light on this particular topic. Serge, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Shams. So just really quickly, I mean, this is probably, I mean, all our work is serious, but this is probably one of the most serious aspects of our work because it really affects people in ways that are not, they're not supposed to be affected in a development process. The development process can cause impact and so on and so forth, but everyone should have a voice and should be able to participate and be included in a development process. And if they are not, then that's not good. And the way that they are not is often through exclusion and harassment and intimidation. And we've had incidents where people were put in jail and threatened, and of course we have to take this into account as part of our work, because without the community and the ability to complain, then our mere existence, which is probably a selfish perspective, our mere existence cannot happen, but more so development, inclusive and good proper development will not take place. So this is really important. So there are a few preventive measures that we have in place. There's not many mitigation we can have as mechanisms, but let me just go through some of the preventive measures and talk a little bit more about what we would do when things happen, which is less in our control. So most of our mechanisms, if not all, have the option where complainants can file complaints on the basis of confidentiality. I would have to make a distinction here between confidentiality and anonymity. it is not possible to receive. In most cases, it's not possible to receive anonymous complaint because we need to interact with the complainants. We need to understand what the basis of the complaint is. We need to understand whether it's related to the project. And obviously in dispute resolution, you cannot have anonymous participants. They need to, at least for the mechanism side, need to know them. And same with the compliance. We need to interact with the community and get a better understanding of the issues they raise. So anonymous complaints are not possible, but there is a confidentiality option for anyone who feels threatened or might be threatened because of their complaint or because of their being vocal within the community or with the borrower or the client, and they feel that their safety is at risk or that of their loved ones or community members. So they have the ability to file a complaint on the basis of confidentiality. Our staff, in most cases, have experience in dealing with situations like these. We've seen them in other cases, and we've been, during our meetings, we do annual meetings for accountability mechanisms. Often we have sessions dedicated for cases of intimidation reprisal. We often invite experts who give us hints and ways to deal with the situation. We ourselves, mechanisms, but also the institutions that we hold accountable have a zero tolerance policy for intimidation reprisal. So that is not acceptable in our projects, whether it is the institution financing the projects or the mechanism that is receiving the complaint concerning the project. It is not acceptable that people feel threatened or be threatened because they are trying to participate in the development process, and most importantly, because they feel impacted by this development process. So there's a lot of measures we would implement. We would use medium that are confidential. If it's WhatsApp often doesn't work, maybe hacked. We would use other communication means such as Telegraph. We would meet in places that are not in plain sight. We could fly people to other countries, requesters, or meet them in other location. We would take all the measures, the preventive measures that are necessary to make sure that people are not exposed because of our process, even if they have asked for confidentiality. So our participation can also put them at risk. So we have to be very careful in doing what we are expected to do. So that's another preventive measures. Now, and we work very closely with the community members, with the civil society that are on site, and we go by what they tell us, especially the community members that feel threatened. If they may have a level of tolerance to the threat, then we have to accept that, and they may not have any level of tolerance, and they would need that. We take extra measures to ensure that they are not exposed, are seen meeting with us, or even perceived to have participated in the accountability process. We have guidelines, we have booklets, we have manuals that describe our work. And the sad reality is that we can't protect people who file complaints. We don't have that ability. But the institutions have leverage. They hold the money, they hold the finances, and they have leverage, especially on the public sector side. So we've had situations where people were harassed, intimidated, and it had to stop, and the institution has made it clear to the borrower that it had to stop, and it stopped. We've had a few cases that are sadly, it actually continued, at least for a period of time. But this is a very hard topic. It's a hard topic not just to talk about, but also to go through, because it is taxing on the community that they have to suffer intimidation because they're asking for redress for harms they are not responsible for. They haven't caused them. They have been imposed on them in a way. So I would leave it at that, Shams, but if there are any questions, of course, we can respond to them.
Thank you very much, Kirsch. That's indeed very helpful, and we will come back to the issue of retaliation during the Q&A. We still have a few minutes. I'll spend just 1 minute on the lessons learned, challenges, and issues. Of course, in the development process, when we are, our project is being implemented, comprehensive baseline data on any issues is important. Meaningful consultation and engagement with stakeholders can go a long way. And in many situations, people think that having 1 or 2 community consultations just ticks the box. But if institutions and project teams really engage in a meaningful consultation, particularly keeping in mind that there are vulnerable groups, there are women, there are marginalized groups, there might be indigenous people. If they engage with them closely and take appropriate measures during the project design and implementation stage, and meaningful consultation is not something that we do only in the early stage, it has to happen throughout the project cycle, because people continue to get affected by the project in different phases, not just during construction. So this is important that meaningful consultation is done throughout the project cycle. And of course, effective remedy, not only at the independent accountability mechanisms level, but in most cases, grievance redress mechanisms are on the front line. They are directly in touch with people in most cases, and can solve issues more efficiently and effectively and very quickly. And therefore, in many cases, we have seen that in theory, GRMs exist, but in reality, they don't. Either they're not sufficiently, they don't have the capacity, they don't have the human resources, or simply they're hidden somewhere in a large building or in the project office that nobody knows that they exist. Therefore, it is important that we pay attention to a good, effective, functioning GRM. I'll stop here, and we still have about 14 minutes to ask questions. I'll remind all the participants that we have shared links. You can download the presentation in 3 languages. You can also ask questions in 3 languages. And if there are any questions, please raise your hand. You can write a question, or you can just introduce yourself and ask the question yourself.
Yes, Shams, I have a question for Serge. Yeah, I was wondering if Serge could share with us any examples from the World Bank's mechanism, the inspection panel, of where they had cases that there was threats of reprisals or actual reprisals, and how did the inspection panel react, and what steps did it take to try to protect the persons in question? Thank you.
Thank you, John. I mean, I just, there's so many, sadly, so many. And I'm thinking I want to stick to the region, because I am from the region. I'm from Lebanon, and this is a common theme. So I remember, and I was with Amy, who's the executive director or the co-executive director of Arab Watch Coalition, and we were in Egypt. I remember many years back, and we had a meeting with farmers affected by a project on the Nile, and they were afraid of voicing their concerns. Ultimately, they did not file a complaint, and we tried to provide them all the necessary assurances. So it's one of those cases where fear prevailed, and it was actually at a stage where, at the mechanisms, it was a couple of decades back, or a decade and a half, we weren't ready to deal with that issue the way we are today. So today, if we have that situation, of course, we would spend more time. We would inform the institution that things are we may receive a complaint, and it's a situation where the borrower is threatening them. So you may have to start pressing the borrower not to be threatening. That the bank normally would ask the borrower to make a public statement that people can complain and it's their right to complain about the project. What we do is when we meet with the borrower all the time, we have very, clear message that complaining is part of the process. Complaining makes projects better. Complainings have different asks. It could be that people don't want the project, or they don't want certain aspect of the project, or they want a better project. So complaining is not necessarily a bad thing. It actually does improve communication, acceptance, and in many cases it improves the projects themselves. So I hope I answered your question, John. There's so many examples I could dwell on. I prefer not to.
All right, thank you, Serge. Let me ask a question about eligibility. I think this is something that we deal with on a regular basis, and of course, a large number of complaints are declared ineligible by independent accountability mechanisms. So, if I may ask, what are some of the key reasons why complaints are ineligible, and what should complainants know to make sure that they have actually worked on their issues and to help them basically bring a strong case to the independent accountability mechanisms. But the question is why most of the complaints are declared ineligible, and any of the speakers could come in. But Helena, you talked about this topic. Do you wanna take the floor?
Sure. I guess in the case of SECU, the threshold is low. You just need to prove that the complaint is related to a UNDP financed or supported project. We haven't had that many cases where it's not eligible, but in the few cases that we had, it's usually because the country office has resolved does something in between the filing of the complaint and while we do our eligibility determination, they do something to address the complainant's concerns. I don't know, Sina, if you want to comment on this too.
Yeah, I mean, I would fully agree. I think most of at least for speaking for SECU UNDP, most cases are actually eligible. The ones that aren't, sometimes it's because it doesn't actually relate to social and environmental concerns. It's something that we could sometimes refer to other investigation sections of UNDP, for example, if it's related to fraud or procurement problems. And yeah, as Elena mentioned, sometimes the harm can be already mitigated by some action before we would even decide, and then therefore it's not going to be an eligible case.
Fantastic. Any other views on eligibility or the key reasons for eligibility or ineligibility? Yes, Alma.
Yeah, thank you, Shams. It's a very important question, actually, because I think what you're trying to also make sure that we communicate is there a criteria for the cases to be made eligible. So within CEO, we have a whole team that takes this very seriously, that looks at the policy, they look at the criteria. The criteria requires that there are active cases with IFC and MIGA, that there is a social and environmental impact, and there are affected individuals by that, as you saw, either one person or 1,000 or more people impacted. And also, it's very important to know that the eligibility is taken very seriously, because we try to communicate at CEO with the people who submit the eligibility complaints. Sometimes, as was explained previously, there are multiple ways to reach CEO, but sometimes we get notes that are only handwritten. There isn't a lot of clarity. Sometimes people submit cases where many of the individuals are already active in other cases, and that would not be accepted. So There are many reasons that they could be rejected, but at the same time, as mentioned earlier by other colleagues, if they meet the criteria around eligibility, then they are definitely considered, and then immediately it kicks in the 90-day assessment period where our team goes on the ground, the mediators are selected, and the entire process is started. And based on the assessment, they decide to go to dispute resolution, as I mentioned earlier, or to compliance. So I just wanted to say we have an entire team that is in a criteria that informs the decision-making and the policy of CEO that was revised in 2021.
Thank you, Alma. And before we move on, I just want to request all participants to please scan this QR code or click here if you have the presentation. I've shared a link in the chat. Please click to provide us your feedback. That is extremely important. We are drawing very close to the end of this outreach event, but it will be helpful for us to know what you feel about it, what you think about it. So please fill in the feedback survey. We want to definitely improve. A lot of resources go into these outreach activities, and we want to make sure that we are doing it the right way. So your feedback certainly matters. I want to give an opportunity. I don't see Serge's hand. I want to give an opportunity to Maria to talk about the issue of eligibility from the project affected community's perspective. What are some of the challenges that you see, Maria, that people aren't really? I mean, we understand that a lot of people are illiterate, out there in remote communities. They may not fully understand, even if they are literate people, they may not fully understand these complex policies of independent accountability mechanisms, or even who has financed the project, who are these big institutions. How do you help communities, or what can we do to really help communities understand IAMs better, and that they have a recourse available to us? Maria?
I think this is where civil society organizations can step in the MENA region. They can help communities understand what are independent accountability mechanisms, or what is their function, and file in the complaints process. Arab Watch Coalition organizes workshops. We try to publish as much material as we can online in Arabic, so it's more accessible. But I think from the independent accountability side, I think language is a problem. So trying to break down this in Arabic and making it more accessible would also be helpful to communities.
Thank you very much, Maria. That's very helpful. Are there any other questions or any comments? Anyone who would like to come in and say something, ask a question, or make a comment, please feel free. We still have 3 minutes. Let's make full use of the time and close that.
Yeah. Shams?
Yes, Serge.
Yeah, I just wanted to do a very quick comment earlier in the context of eligibility, because it was mentioned that there is a high load of non-eligible cases. We put a lot under that term, and it should be really unpacked, because there is a lot of cases that are not relevant. We receive complaints about projects that are not even financed by our institution, so these would not be eligible. There are cases that actually get resolved because they come through, and they're minor cases. They get resolved actually as they're being raised, because it's a quick issue for some reason, whatever, it wasn't resolved initially. So there's more to not eligible cases than it meets the eye. But everything that is a legitimate complaint actually gets processed, and gets the process it requires for the case.
Fantastic, Serge. Thank you very much for this very important comment. Hala, you have your hand raised. Please unmute yourself.
شكرا شمس، شكرا لكم جميعا. أنا هلا مراد من مؤسسة اسمها دبين للتنمية البيئية موجودة في الأردن. أنا معنية أكثر بالمساءلة البيئية والعمل على العمل على المشاريع التي قد تنتهك بشكل أو بآخر الحقوق البيئية للمجتمعات المحلية. التقيت عددا من الحضور سابقا، وأنا عضو أيضا في تحالف أرب ووتش. أنا فقط أريد أن أقول أننا يعني عادة ما نحضر هذه الندوات ونحتاج أكثر يمكن إلى حالات أو نماذج أو كيس ستاديز أكثر وضوحا يمكن فيما يرتبط في القضايا البيئية. أتمنى أن يكون هنالك ندوات متخصصة فيما يرتبط بالشأن البيئي، وتحديدا اليوم نتحدث عن إشكاليات عميقة لها علاقة بالنظم الغذائية، لها علاقة أيضا بالتحولات والعمل المستمر من أجل توفير المياه الكافية وتحديدا في المناطق المختلفة، وهذه عادة ما تضغط على الموارد بشكل كبير، والمشاريع التي يقودها القطاع الخاص عادة أيضا ما تضغط على هذه الموارد. ليس فقط عندما يكون هنالك انتهاكا مباشرا لحقوق الإنسان علينا أن نقدم شكوى، ولكن علينا أيضا أن نعمل في المجال الاحترازي، أي ما قبل أن يكون هنالك شكوى علينا أن يكون هنالك مجال لمزيد ومزيد من المشاورات وتمكين المجتمعات المحلية للإدلاء بأصواتهم بشكل واضح وتخوفاتهم، وأيضا الأشياء التي يمكن أن ندرأ خطورتها قبل أن تحدث. فعلينا يعني أنا فقط أريد أن أقول أننا هل يمكن لنا تنظيم في المستقبل مقاربات مثل هذه المقاربات لنكون على الأرض بشكل أكثر إيجابية ونعطي مجالا للشراكة ما بين المجتمع المدني وبين القطاع الخاص وأيضا القطاع الحكومي والمؤسسات التمويلية. شكرا لكم جميعا، كانت ندوة هامة ومثيرة جدا للاهتمام. سعدت جدا بلقائكم جميعا.
Shams, may I come in very quickly with your permission?
Yes,
I'm wrapping up.
Yes,
I just wanted to make sure that we bring attention to a call for mediators for the MENA region. It is a call by 3 mechanisms: CO, IRM, and CM. So please check our websites for details, how you can apply and how you can become part of the mediation team in the region. Thank you.
Excellent, Alma. Thank you very much. And Hala, your point is well taken. I think we hear the need for workshops on many topics, including the one that you mentioned. Our focus is, of course, on independent accountability, but we also understand that there is need for capacity building on environmental and social issues. And happy to take your feedback back to our relevant colleagues, but also I think through these outreach efforts, we try to transmit the knowledge to the extent possible. But if you could, specifically, write what we can do, maybe bilaterally, that will help us understand the point more clearly and come up with a way forward. And if we have to transmit the feedback to our maybe environmental and social colleagues, we will be very, very happy to do that. Okay. I think we have crossed. We are on the dot. We have this has been an excellent 2 hours interaction. I really wish, frankly, that we had more questions and more interaction with participants here. But we understand that some of the participants may not like to speak or even ask questions, but we hope that the information that we have provided is helpful. We have translated the documents into Arabic and French, which are available. We will make those links public as well. Please feel free to share this information with your fellow civil society organizations, project-affected communities. Take this word out there and help us with more outreach, through your efforts as well. You are our partners, CSOs particularly, and we really rely on your support to make sure that people get to know about independent accountability mechanisms. I would before I close, I would really like to thank the Arab Watch Coalition for all the support that you have provided. This has been an excellent collaboration, and we would certainly like to continue this in the future. I would really like to thank all the participants who have taken part in today's seminar. We had a relatively low turnout, but give us feedback. Tell us how we can actually increase, the participation. Tell us how we can leverage technology. So do fill the feedback survey and guide us how best we can do it, because we are putting in a lot of effort, time, and resources, and we are genuinely keen to help civil society and project-affected communities understand the work of independent accountability mechanisms, because we do believe that it is important and relevant, for everyone. I would also like to thank all the independent accountability mechanisms who are participating in this seminar. It has been an excellent journey, and we have done this before. We are doing it now, and let's continue this effort in other regions as well. There's a template evolving out of this approach, and let's improve this. With this, I would really like to thank everyone. My last request is please fill up the feedback survey, and with that, I would request all participants, if you would like to sign out, maybe next 1 minute or two, please feel free to do so. I would request the colleagues who would like to stay on in this call for a quick debrief, 5-10 minutes. Let's talk about how it went and how we can improve going forward, including our colleagues from the Arab Watch Coalition. Please stay on if you have time, so we can discuss, and I'll invite other participants. If you think basically the seminar is closed, so I'll invite you to sign out of this call. And let's give it 1 minute before we can move on to the debrief session.